Greetings. Welcome to Powered by Ancestry. I'm your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. Today, our topic will be calling and ancestry. Many of us often talk about and certainly have heard of the idea of a calling. That is, what am I called to do in my human experience, whether this is the first, second, third, or fourth, or more iteration in a human form. And so what is the thing called the calling, right? What is it about? Who gets it? Who does not? Is it selective, or is it designed for only certain people? These questions I want to address in this episode. So what is a calling? A calling is often something that is associated with a destiny or a purpose. I want to put both destiny and purpose aside because we have a few episodes on those topics. What I want to focus on is calling in terms of what it is and when it is. That is, when it happens. You see, a calling is not simply a vocation or a craft or a particular occupation or a career that we may take on or assume. In other words, being a professor or a doctor or lawyer is not a calling. Those are occupations. A calling is a particular innate, you may call it passion or attraction. It's the kind of thing that you would do even if you didn't get paid for it and still be satisfied by the substance of doing the work of that calling. In other words, the calling occurs not after we're born, but before we're born. I use myself as an example. I am, among several things, a healer, right? A spiritualist. My abilities, my skill set as a healer, I was born with it. Much like I was born with a birthmark, or you might be born with a birthmark. This happens before we enter this human world and therefore join ourselves into flesh and bones to have a human experience. Now, the calling is not always immediate or apparent because the calling requires you to have a cast of people around us to clarify it for us. And so oftentimes, there's some of us who will journey through different religions and belief systems in our lifetime. We may become Christians or Muslims or Buddhists or atheists, journeying through all these particular philosophies and dogmas, thinking that we are trying to find ourselves or our callings. And oftentimes we fail to do so, not because the dogmas themselves are failures, but because we haven't had the cast around us to clarify that calling. I know a woman, a little bit older than me, who, since very young, used to have these very vivid dreams. I'm giving you a hint here. Very vivid dreams. And whatever she dreamed, it would happen, that it would come true. It would happen in the physical, mundane world, right? And she would see things at day, at night, that other people didn't see. And the people around her, i.e. her family, used to call her crazy, tease her, mock her, jeer her as being, oh, there she go again, with a side eye. What the cast of people around her failed to appreciate and therefore failed her to realize is that she had a calling to be a healer, a seer, because she can see, not better or worse, but just differently. And that difference is a calling to heal. And often healers will have some of the same symptoms of the people that they will in fact heal. In other words, they're healers who specialize in psychosomatic trauma, also known as mental illness or disease. And they themselves may have experiences or bouts with it during their early years in life, because that prepares them as part of their calling to see the very thing and to heal the very thing that they would have been accustomed to. For her, the same is true. And so her ability to see and to hear and to potentially heal was undermined because the cast around her, rather than mock and jeer her and ridicule her, they could have supported her. They could have clarified for her to say, hey, we may not be skilled enough to clarify your gifts and help you to hone them, but we can take it to someone who can do so. Instead, this person had lived a life into her 60s. She has been in and out of several mental institutions, on a range of psychotropic drugs or medications. And in the end, though she's still alive, she has missed out on her calling because of the cast members around her. You see, this is why we human beings are born into a family. This is why we are not asexual organisms that birth ourselves. We have to have the right cast members around us. By right, I mean the appropriate cast members around us to be able to facilitate and essentially clarify, if you will, buff away the rough edges and smooth out the callings that we all have. And our callings are different because they are programmed, if you will. That is, the software in us is programmed by Ancestry. And that software is then plugged into our hardware, our flesh and bones. But if the end user, if the people around us can't recognize or use that software, the computer becomes useless. It never realizes its true potential and lives out its calling. And so the calling we're born with, but being born with it isn't enough. We have to have the right cast members around us, or be led to the right cast members around us so that we can have that calling clarified, honed, enhanced, and put to use. Otherwise, the very talents involved in that calling can be our own undoing. And so, as in the story I told you about this unnamed woman, she has been led to believe, and she believes that she has a mental illness. But all along, it was a spiritual calling. And so her pathway to realize her calling was stunted or arrested by the people around her who themselves are so seduced by one dogma or another, religious dogma or another, they could not see or aid and support this person when they needed it. And so our callings are not our professions. Our callings are not our crafts. They are these innate passions that are often given off certain kinds of signals or clues when we are younger. And so, for instance, if you find yourself being drawn to certain kinds of music or drawn to certain kinds of art, or whatever the particulars may be, just because you're driven by something inside of you, more than likely that's part of your calling. But having a calling isn't enough, isn't sufficient. It has to be developed. It has to be honed. It has to be fashioned to be able to maximize that calling, get the most out of it. And so for me, though I was born with it, it had to be molded. It had to be clarified. And that's where my different quote-unquote trainings came in. Or let's say, better yet, my experiences in Ghana and Jamaica and Brazil and other parts came in, working with alongside other healers. And they would show me things that, in fact, would lead me by way of some tools to clarify, but also to grow and develop what I already had inside of me. I had the right cast members. Now, they came later in life, but that's not the point. When they come is less than the fact that they do come, or that they are there. And all along, I've had my grandfather and the whole cast of Ancestry with me. And so, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to clarify the calling of that child. That is, having the calling isn't enough or sufficient. And I must emphasize that. We have to have the right cast members around us with the right sensitivity and sensibility to hone, support, develop, and grow that innate passion that you are drawn to naturally, that you exhibit when you are younger, naturally, that you gravitated to naturally. And through that calling, you offer your own set of healing for yourself and for those who come in contact. So yes, musicians are healers, if that's their calling. Yes, artists, visual, other kinds of artists are healers, if that's their calling. And so, once more, all of us are born with an innate passion or sensitivity or sensibility about why we came in the time we did, through the family we did, because we do have choice about the families to which we enter this world. And I will say this, not because you are born to a mother and father doesn't mean that they are in fact your mother and father. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We're talking about cast members now. That will clarify our calling. You see, passing through a womb doesn't make that person your mother. Our mother and fathers, in the human sense, are simply the medium or vehicles through which we came here. In other words, they are the visas that allowed us to travel to this world. But our real and therefore spiritual mothers and fathers may not be the same. And so I know someone who their physical human mother birthed them, and for years it was not apparent to her why this human mother always had a negative, harsh, and just draconian attitude and feeling towards her, as if she wasn't her child. And then later on it clicked. Of course, that wasn't her real mother. You see, spirits and ancestors have families, have relations. And when we come into this human world, sometimes we come with them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we enter this world through different people, meaning not your family in the spiritual world of which you left. And that is why we need to have the right cast members around us. Because if we don't, like the woman that I mentioned a moment ago, she was born into a family that wasn't her real, that is spiritual family. And that's why they took set upon her. They were harsh to her. And that's why at some point she needed to be among people that could be able to recognize her gifts and develop them. Because it wouldn't happen in the context of her human family, because these are not her real family. Those aren't her people. And so yes, much like in the human physical world, we're organized into families and communities and peoples, the same is true for the spiritual ancestral world. And so in a previous episode, I made mention to my sister who was born and she passed away in the human sense around 11 months old. She is my sister in the spiritual world. And that's why I'm able to speak with her once she has transitioned out of her bones and flesh and has moved on into the world of spirit. In other words, the relation remains intact, whether in spirit or in the temporal human world. That's how we know that we have our real family and that we don't. I know this may seem new or at least jarring to us to perhaps consider that the people that we've called mother and father all our lives may not be our real mother and father in a spiritual sense. That the people that we call kinfolks may not be our real kinfolks, may not be our real people. And this feature of our spiritual cycling in terms of leaving ancestral home, having a human experience, and then going back to ancestral home, in that circuit, we often come through these imperfect and sometimes mismatch of human beings. And a key thing to recognize if you want to, backtrack in your life, if you're an adult watching this, think about those in your family, human family, who were unnecessarily cold and harsh and mean to you. They probably aren't your people in a spiritual sense. Just go back in your memory and think about the presence or absence of genuine love, care, and affection, or the opposite, and the consistency of the two. And if you look back enough, you say, yeah, I don't know why, for some reason, this person just had it out for me. They're probably not your people. And so having a calling means having a sense or getting a sense of having the appropriate cast members around you to develop and nurture and grow that calling. Think about all the millions of people in this world that cycle in and out of this human world that missed out in one iteration or another on their calling because of the mismatch between their spiritual and the human family. The mismatch between through whom they're born and related to in a human sense, and the inability of those persons to recognize or nurture and support your calling, and therefore who you really are and what you came here to do. And so callings are baked into us before we're born, but they have to be necessarily developed and honed. And we have to consider that through whom we're born, into what family constellation we're born, may not be the spiritual family that we are related to, and therefore we have to find ways to make our callings come alive, be nurtured, be supported, so we can do the very things we came here to do. For Powered by Ancestry, I've been your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. Please leave your questions in the comments or thoughts for other episodes in the comment section below. Until next time, stay well.